次に2014年11月に東北大学災害科学国際研究所において開催されました知のフォーラムの成果報告 The report on the international workshop on the implementing practical disaster risk reduction をリード・バシャー先生にお願いいたします。バシャー先生はニュージーランド国立水権大気研究所やコロンビア大学 IRI 等の研究機関にて気候変動に関する優れた研究に取り組まれました。2004年からは国連防災戦略事務局 ISDR にて国際早期警戒プログラムを立ち上げられ、後に兵庫行動枠組み HFA の起草に携わるなど、国連での国際防災政策立案の要を担ってこられました。現在はマッセイ大学客員研究員、ビクトリア大学ウェリントン校にて教鞭を取られております。では、バシャー先生、よろしくお願いいたします。
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I thank Iridis for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to report on the work of the International Workshop on Implementing Practical Disaster Risk Reduction, which was held here in Sendai on the 7th and subsequent days of November. I first should mention that this workshop was organised by the Institute but sponsored by the Tohoku Forum for Creativity, which is a new initiative by Tohoku University to expand the international connections and interdisciplinary work of the university. So this was one of the Tohoku Forum for Creativity's first major events. The aim of the workshop was to summarise expertise and strategies in selected areas. So those selected areas I'll mention in a minute. It draws, of course, on the background of Japan's long experience in disaster risk reduction and with, of course, disaster in the first instance, and in particular the experience of the Great East Japan earthquake and the subsequent tsunami. This was part of a series of events. Professor Imamura has mentioned these in his opening address. So there's a sequence of activities that are rolling through to try to provide a better basis for how practical risk reduction is achieved through science. As you see, 70 participants and about a quarter from outside Japan, 5 breakout topics, plenaries and a workshop report, which is, I believe, if it's not already, it soon will be available on the Iridis website, and a very interesting one-day field trip. The participants in the workshop were most appreciative of this field trip to the tsunami-affected areas and noted that in the report. There were 2 keynote addresses, one on the Disaster Digital Archive, and we'll hear more about that from Professor Gordon later, and the other on bridging gaps across. There are many gaps in the disaster risk reduction business, gaps in concepts, gaps between sciences, and gaps between what happens at national level and community level and at the international level. So this issue of seeing the overall picture and identifying the capabilities and bringing them together is an important task for us for the future. The breakout topics, there are 5 of them, and they're listed here. So they're basically about education, they're about science and risk assessment, disaster medicine and public health, which has been a neglected topic in the risk business, architecture and land use planning, and early warning systems and evacuation, coupled with partnershiping between government, the private sector and academia. And as we'll see, this partnershiping business has been a a real area of learning here in the tsunami affected areas. The Japan Digital Archive is a very intriguing technology initiative, but designed for educational purposes. It's a portal which gives access to diverse data types on the earthquake in all sorts of forms, and some of them listed here, some of them actual data, but more often text and imagery that otherwise would be hard to access in different contexts. So this portal enables you to access this information, but beyond that, to create new packaging of that information in ways that are relevant to the issues that you're facing, or the projects you're facing, or the educational purposes that you're addressing. So this capability to put together information from different archives to create and curate information is a very potent capability, and I'm sure we'll see more of this in the future. Bridging the gaps was concerned with initially with conceptual frameworks, because if we don't have the same ideas, or we use words in a way that means one thing to one person and one thing to another, then we will struggle to put together the ideas and the needs for action in disaster risk reduction. I've already mentioned, of course, there are always problems between science and policy environments, different languages, but also between different sectors. So bridging is there as a constant demand in science, and there are clear benefits for doing it, as we know. The larger pool of knowledge and experience, standardized comparable methods, faster generation and uptake of new knowledge. If people are to use Gordon McBean's expressions, co-design, co-production, co-delivery, and ultimately more effective implementation of programs of reducing risk. But so often this is the story. The scientist is working away in their lab, they understand part of the problem, they have some terrific ideas, knowledge, technology, but why don't the policymakers make use of it? Meanwhile, the policymaker or the manager's very busy in the office, competing requirements upon them, budget limitations, and they're constantly looking for usable information. And they don't have the technical knowledge to make these judgments, but they often find it's difficult to make use of scientific information. And it's a particular problem in disaster risk, because serious events are infrequent. So do you really have to do something today, or can we leave it till tomorrow? So there's a gap filling requirement here, and this is something that academia must play an important role in. And IRIDES is founded on the basis that this is an important requirement and can be done. It's one of the institutional arrangements that we need. The first major breakout topic was on disaster education and the Disaster Digital Archive. This, I've mentioned the archive now. There's a major movement on school safety, and it rests on three pillars. Safe learning facilities, so the school itself is safe and not potentially harmful to children. Pillar 2 is school disaster management, so that when events happen, children and teachers know what to do, and they are able to quickly evacuate if necessary, or avoid problems such as fire and so on. Pillar 3 is risk reduction and, to read it here, resilience education. So this is part of the teaching process, the learning process. So risk must be built in to courses like geography, and so that children are able to learn what the nature of risk is and understand it in their setting, in their communities, in their environment. This is an example of a process where at an elementary school here in this in Miyagi Prefecture, Ishinomaki, where with a mapping tool, students are able to go around and actually assess in their own district what the risks are and how people feel about those risks. And this is some results here from major findings that children are able, through this sort of process, to feel much more confident about the nature of the threats that they faced and how they will deal with them. And now we have a disaster. I call upon the risk manager, Irides, to tell us what to do. There must be something about my presentations, you know. When I gave that bridging talk at the forum in November, the computer failed there as well. I was the only one for whom it failed. Okay, so for each of these topics, I'll give a couple of slides and then I'll talk, briefly summarise the points that group summarised. In some cases, you'll need to read these because it's too much. We don't have the time to read them in detail. So there are, in those first few points, there are conceptual issues, this idea of resilience of the education sector. So there are ideas here about thinking about risk in schools. But the last couple are more about what do you do, and this idea of minimum safety standards, of investment planning, so that if there are, usually it involves some money to be spent on the educational institution. So how do you organise that over time? There's two features that I noted in this, is that the education sector is on a roll actually with risk, because there are numerous organisations now understanding and backing the agenda. And this is being represented in the World Conference with a very targeted, systematic approach, looking for targets and methodologies. So this is an area we can say, yeah, good progress. Disaster science and risk assessment. This was a very interesting one for those of us who have a scientific background, to see the enormous progress that's being made and the way in which the science can be represented visually, for example, in this map on the right. But it's not just high-tech science, it's also going back and look at the historical situation. Here is a profile, a soil profile, in an area nearby here, where the previous events, dating back to AD 869, when a tsunami occurred, is laid out in evidence over time in the profile of the soil. This is very interesting information for people who live in such a district, to see that it's not just scientists waving possibilities for the future in front of them, but it has actually happened before. Two advances I particularly noted were the high quality of hazard mapping that was possible in this region. Not general stuff, but quite specific stuff by area, and for particular return periods. And I need some more help here. And on the right, there was a figure describing what are called fragility surfaces. It's been found that modelling of damage to buildings by water flows alone do not really represent the damage that occur in real tsunamis. And it seems that the presence of debris in the water flow accelerates and accentuates the damage. And you could imagine a motor car floating in the water running to the side of your house can do some considerable damage. And when you've seen the images, the videos of tsunami, you could see high levels of weighty debris, building materials, oil tanks, cars, and these projectiles make a big increase in the damage structure. So some of the work at Irides is now investigating this in a quantitative way, and that diagram did show that. I'm not quite sure whether the next one is on medical science and public health, so I found this a particularly interesting area because it's not an area of my expertise, and we're seeing some new thrusts in this area as public health experts and medical experts play a greater role in disaster risk and its reduction. There is a sense that the Hiogo Framework for Action has been very poor at representing the medical concerns, public health concerns, and that if you look at the Hiogo Framework itself, the word health, the word medicine, the word hospital, they do appear, but only just. So I think there's one major paragraph on health and medicine, but it's not just another sector. It's fundamentally involved in disaster risk, since people's health is a primary element of their well-being, and secondly, when an event occurs, the health sector is central to the follow-up and the safety of people. There are often many injuries, and these may need to be dealt with by institutions that themselves have been damaged in some way, maybe through loss of power or direct damage, or even injuries and deaths of their own staff. In this sector, in the health sector, a number of very practical proposals are being developed. One is to establish much better textbook material on disaster medicine. A second is to develop a little pocketbook which is available to health practitioners, and the sort of thing that when a stress occurs, that a doctor or a nurse or an emergency worker can pull out to understand how the disaster medicine system works at such a time. Japan has some new initiatives on this. Well, they're not new anymore, but they were new to me at least, with the idea of a focal point, a person whose job is to be the coordinator of medical services in the event of a disaster. Not just somebody from the hospital who happens to be the boss of the hospital, but somebody who understands and is trained for that emergency response capability. Thank you. Now let's see. So you can see that this is the disaster medicine and public health preparedness area, but you'll see there was also, I missed the summary points from the disaster risk assessment. And what you see is there's these three areas. One is hazard assessments, which involve core scientific capability. There's the connection between that science and the development process, and how science needs to be more integrated into that. And lastly, the promotion of free exchange of information and cooperation generally, so that we don't duplicate systems in regional basins, for example. So there can be one tsunami warning system, for example, that all countries contribute to, and not multiple systems. So here we have a sense of the medical and health relationships, and that need for thinking in a more holistic way about those. We need to look at actually why and how people are killed and injured. It's not just, oh, they died, but how did they die? What is the process? In the Great Kanto earthquake, it was fire was the major cause of death, whereas in the Kobe earthquake, it was asphyxia or crushing of people in buildings, while for the Great East Japan earthquake, drowning and trauma associated with being in water and subject to debris flows. I've mentioned the handbook and textbooks, the need to identify public health and policy, particularly through the Hyogo framework, and other activities to get the health community, the medical community, more directly engaged in the disaster risk issue. And there's some other points I picked up here as well. One very interesting one was the non-communicable diseases, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, etc., where people suffering from those died prematurely because of lack of medical support in the immediate aftermath of the event. And I believe that maybe another 3,000 people may have died prematurely as a result of this circumstance. Fourth topic, architecture and land use planning. And I see my time has run up, but I also have a bit of credit for the machine breaking down, I think. Architecture and land use planning is central to risk. In many cases, our risk is created inadvertently through poor architecture, through bad building practices, through use of the wrong land. So taking a more active role in that is an important way of reducing risk in future. Here's a very good example presented by Professor Murao. In this Hongo Tuni village, after 1933 tsunami, the settlements were mainly on high ground on the right of the picture where the green arrow indicates. But over the subsequent years, people started to settle and build buildings in the lower areas of the valley, and the consequence in 2011 is it's jammed up, it's not moving. So I can't, so it's broken down again. So let me tell you that what happened was that this area remained unaffected, largely unaffected by the tsunami, but the water ran right up here and largely destroyed all of the properties all through here. So it's an example of how basic knowledge, basic scientific knowledge gets forgotten over time. So there needs to be means to continue to reinforce such knowledge and to ensure that that any sort of land development it incorporates risk as part of its continuing process. So I have a problem because the machine will not continue through the slides. What I recall of the next, it's just not going, it's okay, it's off now. Okay, thank you. Okay, so this shows you that village situation with the devastation in the low-lying areas. So now we're moving again. The conclusions from this session were they're somewhat conceptual in that there's a whole process of land use planning and architectural creation, but it's not something that you can just say, oh, do this solution or that solution. There are multiple solutions, and it depends very much on the context. But you have to have the thinking in behind it, and this is these concepts of mainstreaming risk into development, understanding that risk is something that has to be managed. There's no such thing as zero risk, and this was the conclusion of this group. Early warning systems. So this last session was on early warning systems and the partnershiping issue. They were sort of squeezed together. Early warning systems are well developed. They have to have, it's more than just a technical scientific thing. It has to know what it's warning about, what the risks are. The warnings that are created by the technical service have to be communicated, and the people who are going to use them need to know what they mean and know what to do with them. And early warning systems typically fail in this latter part, in the communication, preparedness, response area. Here in the tsunami-affected areas, evacuation was a major, in one way a success, and yet still much to be done and much learned about how to improve evacuations. The warning issues of false warnings are a real issue, false alarms in all sorts of forecasting areas, and we need to be able to represent those better to the public so that people know what alarm may mean but may not come to pass. In partnershiping, there's a need for much more formal, active relationships between government, private sector and academia. And academia can play quite a role in that, and through its independent and knowledge-based approach to promote partnershiping. One particular success was the Tohoku Alliance, which is hosted by the Development Bank of Japan, small secretariat there, but it's a roundtable, free-flowing thing, and it's proved valuable because people keep coming back to its meetings to share information and identify issues for the future. So this is a model that is worth looking into closely and following. The conclusions of this group were as follows. Refers to the Tohoku Alliance, and there are more issues here, systems, in terms of the conclusions. These are conclusions across the whole workshop. Of course, we all know Japan has a wealth of experience and expertise, and this is something that other countries can benefit from a lot. There was noted that across these different sectors like education and medicine, public health, architecture, a lot of the themes crossed the boundaries, so there's co-learning to be done there in sharing results, sharing approaches. I think that this core issues of risk in the Hyoga framework is still a major area where science needs to play an important role, and we may hear more of that later this afternoon. I think this is the last one. Research institutes of the bridging type, like IRIDES, can play important roles both in having pillars of expertise, but also bridging across those expertise and representing them to the community and to policymakers. There was a sense that researchers themselves ought to be better prepared and not wait 6 months after an event to start talking about their science, but to be ready to meet the needs of the public when events happen. There are numbers of topics of research, and I would, one that particularly interested me was this last one, studies of how the learning that you get in an event, such as the Great East Japan earthquake, can be extended in time, not beyond, so that our children and our children's children have as much learning as we have today from the direct experience, but also in time, so that other communities, not just in Japan but in other parts of the world, can somehow internalise the lessons and the learning that have so painfully been experienced here in Japan. So with that, I thank you, and I apologise for the problems we've had in the front and for this going on longer than expected. Thank you.
バシャー先生、ありがとうございました。次に